Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we take the dismal science of economics and turn it into a full-blown circus of absurdity. Today, we're diving headfirst into the icy waters of the Russian economy. Spoiler alert, it's colder than a Siberian winter and sinking faster than the Titanic. Grab your popcorn, your spreadsheets, and maybe a lifeboat, because this is going to be a wild ride through debt crises, oil slumps, and geopolitical poker games. And oh, look, it's 2025, and Vladimir Putin is jetting off to Alaska to meet Donald Trump, yes, that Trump, because apparently, nothing screams economic stability like a summit in the middle of nowhere during a war. Let's break this down, boss economic style, from the surface-level clownery to the deep, dark economic abyss beneath. Buckle up. Let's start with the obvious, folks. Russia's economy is leaking faster than this barrel of Urals crude. Oil revenues? Down the drain. Budget deficit? Wider than the Bering Strait. Inflation and interest rates? So high, they're practically in orbit. According to Bloomberg's latest investigation, Russia's budget deficit has ballooned to its largest in over 3 decades. That's right, folks, we're talking pre-Yeltsin, Soviet collapse-level chaos here. And oil, oh, sweet oil, the lifeblood of the Russian economy, has slumped to an average of $55 a barrel in 2025, down from the $70 Moscow was banking on in its budget. Ouch. That's a 30% shortfall in federal revenue, considering oil and gas make up roughly a third of the Kremlin's piggy bank, per 2024 data from the Bank of Finland. Now, let's talk inflation, shall we? Consumer prices are rising faster than a MiG-29 at takeoff, over 10% by mid-2025, up from 7.4% at the start of 2024. And potatoes, yes, potatoes, the humble spud that Russians love more than vodka, are hitting record highs. Imagine going to the supermarket and needing a loan just to make borscht. Meanwhile, the Bank of Russia, led by the ever-stoic Elvira Nabiullina, has jacked up interest rates to 21%, the highest in over 2 decades. That's right, folks, borrowing money in Russia right now is about as affordable as buying a Faberge egg on a janitor's salary. But wait, there's more. The National Wealth Fund, Russia's rainy day piggy bank, is on life support. Experts at the Gaidar Institute for Economic Policy are warning it could be completely depleted by the end of 2025. So, to recap, no oil money, sky-high inflation, crippling interest rates, and a piggy bank that's basically just lint and IOUs. Sounds like a recipe for economic disaster, right? But oh, it gets worse, much worse. Let's dig deeper, shall we? Now, let's pull back the curtain on the real circus act, Russia's banking sector, or as I like to call it, Putin's shadow war chest. Picture this, it's February 24, 2022, and Putin decides to invade Ukraine, expecting to waltz into Kiev in 72 hours. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Instead, he got a war of attrition, and wars, my friends, are expensive. So, what does our fearless leader do? He turns Russia's banks into his personal ATM. The day after the invasion, Putin signed an amendment to Federal Law No. 29 FC, forcing banks to issue what they call preferential loans to war-related contractors. Translation: hand out cash like candy at Halloween, regardless of whether these companies can pay it back. These loans come with government-set interest rates, often way below market rates, because who cares about profitability when you're funding a war machine, right? According to Craig Kennedy at Harvard's Davis Center, Russian corporate debt may have ballooned by as much as 71% between July 2022 and November 2024, that's 36.6 trillion rubles, or $460 billion, folks. And guess where most of that debt is concentrated? Arms manufacturing, logistics, steel, basically, anything that goes boom or helps things go boom. But here's the kicker, the Kremlin has turned the banking sector into a black box of risk. Financial monitoring requirements for defense lending? Eased. Rules on marking loans as doubtful? Waived. It's like letting a toddler run a candy store with no inventory checks. Spoiler alert, the candy's going to disappear, and the store's going to go bankrupt. Sergei Guriev, dean of the London Business School, put it best when he told Bloomberg, it's impossible to see whether there's a banking problem if the banks want to roll over the loans and the central bank is willing to close their eyes. Translation: Russia's banks are sitting on a ticking time bomb of bad debt, and nobody knows how big the explosion will be. And the fallout is already starting. Take VTB, Russia's second-largest bank. Its net interest income plummeted by 49% year-on-year in the first half of 2025. Oof. Meanwhile, the central bank is urging lenders to restructure bad loans instead of calling them in, because nothing screams financial stability like sweeping your problems under the rug. The Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting, a think tank usually cozy with the Kremlin, has even warned of a moderate but rising risk of a systemic banking crisis by April 2026. Moderate, huh? Sounds like the economic equivalent of saying, don't worry, the iceberg is only moderately likely to sink the ship. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the tank in the room, Russia's war economy. See, while the rest of the world was busy adapting to post-COVID realities, Putin decided to pivot his entire economy to war mode. Military and national security spending is set to cost the Kremlin nearly $172 billion in 2025, according to Alexander Prokopenko at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. That's about 8% of GDP, folks. And this isn't a temporary surge, it's a long-term strategic pivot, or as I like to call it, putting all your eggs in one very explosive basket. On the surface, this war economy kept things humming along. GDP growth roared back in 2023, propped up by capital controls, soaring energy revenues, and discounted oil sales to China and India. But fast forward to 2025, and the cracks are showing. GDP growth has slumped to a measly 1.1% year-on-year in Q2 2025, down from over 4% in 2024. The IMF has downgraded its forecast for Russia to just 0.9% growth this year. Meanwhile, civilian sectors, construction, consumer goods, you name it, are getting squeezed dry. Russian media is buzzing with reports of darkening consumer indicators, a slowdown in new building projects, and a rising risk of bankruptcies. And here's the kicker, this war economy is a one-trick pony. If the war stops, the whole house of cards could come crashing down. Heavily indebted defense contractors, propped up by those preferential loans, could default, triggering a cascade of economic chaos. But if the war continues, the problems only get worse, especially if Trump follows through on his threats of tighter oil sanctions. It's a classic catch-22, folks, keep fighting and risk a debt crisis, or stop fighting and risk an economic meltdown. Either way, Putin's juggling act is looking more like a clown on a unicycle juggling flaming torches, while drunk. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at the main event, the Alaska summit. Picture this, Putin, the steely-eyed chess master, sitting across from Trump, the brash dealmaker, in a room colder than their diplomatic relations. On the table? A potential ceasefire in Ukraine, sanctions relief, and the future of Russia's economy. Trump's already trash-talking, saying Putin needs to focus on fixing his economy, which is not doing well right now. Understatement of the century, Don. But here's the thing, Trump smells blood in the water. With oil prices tanking and Russia's banks on the brink, he's threatening secondary sanctions on countries like India for buying Russian oil, and even more measures to choke Russia's energy revenues. And let's not forget, the US has already frozen $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves and capped Russian crude at $60 a barrel. Trump's basically holding a royal flush, while Putin's bluffing with a pair of twos. Putin, of course, is playing hardball. He's demanding sanctions relief and wants Ukraine to cede the entire Donbas region in Crimea. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders have already said, "Nyet," to that deal, but here's the kicker, Trump might just take it. Why? Because a ceasefire that cements Russia's gains could let him claim a diplomatic win, even if it screws over Ukraine. And let's be real, folks, Trump's not exactly known for his long-term strategic thinking. Remember his 2024 campaign promise to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours? Yeah, this summit might just be his chance to say, mission accomplished. Even if it means throwing Kiev under the bus. But here's the real question, who's got the better hand? If Putin walks away with sanctions relief, he might buy his economy some breathing room. But if Trump tightens the screws, Russia's oil revenues could drop another $10 a barrel, and as Trump himself said on CNBC, Putin will stop killing people because his economy stinks. Harsh, but not wrong. Either way, the outcome of this summit could determine whether Russia's economy limps along on life support or flatlines entirely. So, what's the takeaway from this economic clown show, folks? First, let's talk about the dangers of a war economy. Russia's pivot to military spending might have kept the lights on in the short term, but it's a textbook case of putting all your eggs in one basket, and then dropping the basket off a cliff. For our finance pros in the audience, this is a stark reminder of the risks of over-leveraging and lax risk management. When you let banks hand out loans like candy, waive oversight, and hide bad debt, you're not building an economy, you're building a house of cards. Second, let's talk sanctions. The West's sanctions on Russia, freezing reserves, capping oil prices, kicking banks off SWIFT, haven't killed the Russian economy outright, but they've wounded it badly. And with Trump threatening secondary sanctions, we're seeing the power of economic warfare in real time. For our everyday viewers, this is a reminder that geopolitics and economics are two sides of the same coin. What happens in Alaska could affect oil prices, inflation, and even your grocery bill. Finally, let's talk about resilience, or the lack thereof. Russia's economy has survived shocks before, 70 years of communism, the Soviet collapse, the 1998 financial crisis, but this time feels different. With oil revenues drying up, banks on the brink, and a war economy on life support, Putin's high pain threshold might not be enough to save him. And for our finance pros, this is a case study in systemic risk. When you mix bad debt, loose monetary policy, and geopolitical instability, you get a perfect storm. So, there you have it, folks, Russia's economy, a circus of absurdity where the clowns are armed, the tightrope is fraying, and the ringmaster is playing poker with the devil. Will Putin pull off a miracle in Alaska, or will Trump deal the final blow? Stay tuned, because here at Boss Economics World, we'll be watching this train wreck with popcorn in hand and calculators at the ready. Until next time, keep your wallets close and your sanctions closer. Peace out.